Hello and welcome. This is Protections from Discrimination by Businesses, presented by the Civil Rights Department of California. I'm Kara Brodfier and I'm a senior counsel with the department. Before we jump in, I'm going to give you my boring lawyerly disclaimer, and I'm going to tell you that what I'm going to present to you today, we're not establishing policy or rights, and we're not giving legal advice. It's for informational purposes only. And this information is based on the most recent guidance as of the date of this training. And it's your responsibility, if you want to rely on this information, to make sure that it's still relevant and recent in the future. Here is our agenda. First, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the Civil Rights Department and what we do. Then I'm going to give you information on state laws that protect people from discrimination in California. Then I'm going to focus most of my time on the Unruh Civil Rights Act in practice and protections when folks are interfacing with businesses. And I'm also going to give you some resources. Just a bit of information about the Civil Rights Department. We have a large job because we enforce laws to protect people in California from discrimination in housing, employment, businesses, and also from hate violence and human trafficking. Here's how we enforce civil rights laws. We are known for investigating complaints and taking complaints of discrimination and other civil rights violations. So if you think you've been subject to unlawful discrimination, you can file a complaint with us. When we get those complaints and they involve violations of the laws that we enforce, we often will get the parties together to try and come to an agreement or a resolution. We sometimes go to court to prosecute violations of civil rights law. We also have a civil rights council, and they're a group of experts, and they write regulations to clarify the rights and responsibilities that everyone has under the laws that we enforce. We also enforce what's called the Equal Pay Act, which requires everyone to be paid equally, regardless of race or gender. And we collect data on the pay and demographics of large employers' workforces to see if folks are being paid equally. We also do a lot of outreach and education, which is what I'm doing right now. And we work with communities and local and state public bodies to constructively manage and resolve discrimination-based conflict. If someone needs to access CRD services in a language other than English, this is some information on how they can request a translation to get access to our services. If a person with a disability needs an accommodation in order to access CRD services, including filing a complaint, they can use this information to make a request. And here are the anti-discrimination laws enforced by CRD. First, we have the Unruh Civil Rights Act. Some people say Unruh. I've recently heard it's Unruh, so I'm going to use Unruh for this presentation. And the Unruh Civil Rights Act protects people from discrimination by businesses. We also enforce the Fair Employment and Housing Act, and this is a California law that protects people from discrimination in housing and employment, and it also protects people from harassment based on protected characteristics. And there are also additional protections that flow from the Fair Employment and Housing Act, including protections for people who are looking for employment or housing that have criminal histories. We also have the Disabled Persons Act. It's a California law that gives people with disabilities or specific medical conditions the same right to the full and free use of public places. We also enforce what's called Government Code 11135. It doesn't have a snappy name, so we call it 11135. And it protects people from discrimination by entities that receive funding from the state, usually local governments like cities or counties. So if they take money from the state, they can't violate the state's anti-discrimination law. And also the Equal Pay Act, I talked a bit about this when I talked about what CRD does, but this is a law that says that employers can't pay employees less than employees of the opposite sex or another race or ethnicity for substantially similar work. So let's talk briefly about what protected characteristics are, because many of the laws that I just talked about protect people from discrimination if they have specific protected characteristics. And really, protected characteristics, they're things about somebody or a group that are kind of fundamental to a person's identity or beliefs or self-definition. And these are characteristics that are protected by the law from discrimination. An easy example is that the law protects people from discrimination based on race. So race is a protected characteristic. The Unruh Civil Rights Act protects people from what the law calls arbitrary discrimination at businesses based on protected characteristics. And they're characteristics that can involve a trait or condition, a decision, or a choice that's fundamental to someone's belief. So with some of the other anti-discrimination laws that CRD enforces, the law has a specific list of every single protected characteristic. And with Unruh, it's a little bit different. There are specific named protected characteristics under the law, but that's not the full list. It could be any type of arbitrary discrimination. So the characteristics in the law, they provide examples, but they're not the only characteristics protected from discrimination by Unruh. Here's a list of the protected characteristics that are specifically named in the Unruh Civil Rights Act. They include sex, and this includes gender, gender identity, gender expression, pregnancy, childbirth, medical conditions related to pregnancy or childbirth. We have race, color, religion, ancestry, national origin, disability, medical condition, genetic information, marital status, sexual orientation, citizenship, primary language, and immigration status. And these are protected characteristics if somebody has or is a part of a group with a protected characteristic. If somebody is perceived to have a protected characteristic, so maybe somebody thinks that someone is undocumented and they discriminate against that person thinking they're undocumented and they're not, they would still be protected. Or if they are associated with someone with a protected characteristic, so you might be a parent of a child with a disability and you would be protected based on your association with a person with a protected characteristic. So what does the Unruh Act actually require? Basically, the Unruh Act requires businesses to provide full and equal access to a business, the privileges, services, accommodations to everyone. This means businesses have to make sure that everyone has an equal opportunity to use and access a business's services, and businesses can't, because of someone's protected characteristic, refuse to serve somebody or treat somebody worse by providing worse services or inferior services or charging a higher price. It can be very helpful to look at the history of when and why a law was passed, and looking at the history of the Unruh Civil Rights Act really demonstrates why the state of California decided to pass this law when the state did. The Unruh Civil Rights Act was passed in 1959, and this was a time when people of color and people with other protected characteristics did not have full and equal access to businesses. And in response to that, during the civil rights movement, there were sit-ins and boycotts and protests to push for the desegregation of businesses across the country. And in response, the Unruh Civil Rights Act was passed in 1959, and it was one of the nation's first civil rights laws. It was actually passed 5 years before the Federal Civil Rights Act of 1964. So what businesses have to follow the Unruh Civil Rights Act? In the law, the act says it applies to all business establishments of every kind whatsoever. I'm going to name some examples. I'm not going to read all of these here, or we'd be here for a very long time. But some examples are stores or restaurants, bars and nightclubs, hotels and motels, hospitals and doctors' offices, rental housing, convention centers, transportation depots and private transportation services, banks, lenders, and financing agencies, and fitness clubs or gyms. But again, this is not a full list. It applies to all business establishments of every kind whatsoever. There are some exceptions, which I'm going to get into further along in this presentation. Does the Unruh Act apply to housing? Yes. Yes, it does. The Unruh Act covers all businesses in California, including most housing providers. This includes rentals, such as apartments, homes, short-term rentals, such as vacation homes, and hotels. There are some really limited exceptions for specific types of housing that serve specific groups of people, mainly seniors and transition-age foster youth. Unruh also applies to businesses that are involved with selling homes, such as real estate companies or mortgage lenders. And here are some examples of violations of the Unruh Act. One, an apartment manager refusing to rent to someone because they have a disability, a restaurant refusing to serve a family because the parents are a same-sex couple, a store prohibiting a person who is blind from entering with their service animal, a doctor refusing to treat a patient because she is transgender, or a dry cleaner charging more to clean a woman's blouse than a man's shirt when the two items are similar in detail. Here's another example. An appellate court in California recently held that the Unruh Act protects the rights of same-sex couples from discrimination based on their sexual orientation. This case was filed by CRD on behalf of a lesbian couple who tried to buy a wedding cake from Kathy's Creations in Bakersfield, and they were refused service because they were a same-sex couple. And the court held that the Unruh Act protects their right to be served by businesses in California based on their sexual orientation. There are some businesses that are accepted from being covered by the Unruh Civil Rights Act. Unfortunately, the law is not incredibly clear, so I'm going to go over some factors that the courts have used to decide whether an organization is a business and should be covered under the Unruh Act. So some factors that favor coverage under Unruh and would push things to say that the Unruh Act would apply are one, if an organization is open to the general public, but maybe they're excluding a particular group. One case involved it was an athletic club for kids in Santa Cruz, and the athletic club was open to the public, but they were excluding girls, and it was found that they were a business because they charged services and they were generally serving the public. Another factor are if the organization functions more like a business, do they charge fees for their services? And here are some factors that favor that groups or organizations would not be covered by Unruh. If inclusion under the Unruh Act that did not allow them to exclude certain groups would violate their right to intimate association. So would it keep them from being able to have close family relationships, personal relationships? Would it violate their right to what's called expressive association? So the right to associate with other people who share your same values, political, religious, social, or cultural beliefs. If the group is selective based on those shared opinions or values, if the primary purpose is not business, but to be social, if non-members have really no access or little access to the organization slash group's facilities, and if members have a lot of control over how the group runs. And again, because the law is not incredibly clear, here are some examples of groups that have found to be covered under Unruh and groups that have found not to be covered under Unruh. So one example of a group that was found to be covered under Unruh was a privately owned nonprofit that operated recreational services for youth but excluded girls. So that's part of the example that I gave 2 slides ago. Also, a country club that allowed non-members to access their services, their stores, and other facilities was considered to be a business and couldn't exclude women from membership. And here are examples of groups found to not be covered under Unruh. A religiously affiliated high school was allowed by the court to exclude gay students because the main purpose was to educate students consistent with the school's religious beliefs. And the Boy Scouts were also found to not be considered a business under Unruh, although membership is open to the general public, not allowing them to exclude a gay scout leader was found to violate their right to expressive association because the primary function of the Boy Scouts was found by the court to impart a specific set of values. What about harassment by a business? So unfortunately, here also the law is not completely settled on whether harassment is prohibited by Unruh. But some courts in California have ruled that verbal harassment based on protected characteristics may violate the Unruh Act if the business is treating customers unequally. So, for example, a salon owner uses a racial slur against a Black or African American customer may violate the Unruh Act if only Black or African American customers receive this type of treatment. California does enforce another law, Civil Code 51.9, that does specifically prohibit sexual harassment in businesses, service, or professional relationships. This includes sexual harassment by physicians, psychotherapists, dentists, attorneys, social workers with a master's degree, real estate agents or appraisers, elected officials, teachers, directors or producers, and many others. Okay, let's do a hypo. This is Luis. Luis is a person who is blind, and he has a guide dog that helps him navigate his way around. He meets a friend at a popular new restaurant for brunch. He is told that he can't enter with his dog because the restaurant is busy and they are worried the dog might upset the other patrons. But they give him a 25% off coupon and encourage him to come back when things are less busy. Do you think the restaurant violated the law? So go ahead and just think of an answer in your head. I'll give you a few seconds and then we can go over the answer. And the answer is yes. So let's talk about it. There are specific protections for people who use service animals under the Unruh Civil Rights Act. They flow from other types of protections, but generally under the Unruh Civil Rights Act, California's Disabled Persons Act, and also under federal law, businesses are required to give full and equal access to people who use service animals. And the ADA, or the Americans with Disabilities Act, under the federal level, it defines a service animal as any dog that is individually trained to do work or perform tasks for the benefit of an individual with a disability, including a physical, sensory, psychiatric, intellectual, or other mental disability. So these are service animals that are trained to do a specific task to assist a person with a disability. We're not talking about emotional support animals, which are animals that are not trained to do a specific task, but that provide emotional support to people and could be subject to reasonable accommodations and housing and in other areas. We're talking about service animals here. If a business wants to verify whether an animal is a service animal, they are only permitted to ask 2 specific questions. The first is the animal required because of a disability? And they can ask what work or task has the animal been trained to perform, and that's it. And if the animal use of the animal is readily apparent or obvious, if it's a guide dog for a person who is blind, or maybe they're pulling somebody on a wheelchair like in the photo, then businesses shouldn't ask at all because it's obvious. But if there is a need to verify whether an animal is a service animal, those are the two specific questions that are permitted. People with disabilities and Unruh in general. So businesses must accommodate people with disabilities unless doing so would be an undue financial burden or would fundamentally alter the business. And this is decided on a case-by-case basis. So, for example, a private testing company, it's been found, must accommodate a test taker who's legally blind by allowing the test taker to use the assistive technologies that best ensure their disability doesn't affect performance on an exam. And again, this was from a case, and this is determined on a case-by-case basis. Another example, also from case law, it was found by the courts that a restaurant and bar was not required to provide a customer with a disability access to an auxiliary aid to hear background music at the bar when the music was not really a meaningful part of the services provided by the business. They were playing music, but it was really in the background, and the main part of the services were the food. Also, accessibility of websites. So businesses that are open to the public, so that have kind of a brick and mortar, they have to have websites that are accessible to people with disabilities. For example, an in-person business must maintain their websites to be compatible with screen reading software to allow access by customers who are blind. However, online-only businesses are not subject to the Unruh Act, which means that they would not have to have websites that are accessible. Let's do another hypothetical. This is Tao. Tao is transgender and has been taking testosterone to treat gender dysphoria for several years. He gets a new job and has to change health insurance providers. And Tao makes an appointment with his new primary doctor. At the appointment, Tao asks the doctor to start managing his testosterone prescription. The doctor seems uncomfortable and says this is not something she has prescribed before. She says she'll get back to Tao about the process of moving his prescription to her care. A week later, Tao receives a letter in the mail saying that his new insurance provider does not cover prescriptions for hormones to treat gender dysphoria. Have Tao's rights been violated under California law? We're not doing this live, as I said before, but just, think in your head for a few seconds what you think the answer might be. I'll give you a few seconds. Okay, and the answer is yes. So we'll talk about why on the next slide. The Unruh Act also protects the right to obtain and receive gender-affirming healthcare. Unruh prohibits discrimination based on gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, medical condition, and other types of arbitrary discrimination, as we talked about before. And this means that people who need gender affirming healthcare have a right to not be denied this treatment because of their sexual identity, gender expression, or sexual orientation, to obtain treatment for children or adults with a specific medical condition, and this includes gender dysphoria, and to be able to schedule an appointment for gender affirming healthcare. And it should be noted that the refusal of gender affirming healthcare could also violate Government Code 11135 if a hospital or medical provider also receives funding from the state of California. Now let's have some fun with some examples. So this is our first example. This is Fisher and Sons Funeral Home, and maybe you may or may not get that reference. Fisher and Sons Funeral Home is hired to host the services for a celebrity that recently passed away. Many members of the public show up to pay their respects. but the staff only allows invited guests to attend the services. Do you think they violated the Unruh Act? I'm going to give folks a second to think, and then let's talk about it. And the answer is no. So let's talk about why. So businesses can have policies that restrict access. Businesses can have reasonable policies that are related to the services they're performing. So for example, at the funeral home, the duties and the responsibilities that they are performing are to the folks that paid for the funeral and who are related to the person or friends with or close to the person that passed away. And they restricted members of the public from coming to allow those services to happen in a way that wasn't disruptive to people that were invited to the funeral. Another example is that a rental car agency can refuse to rent vehicles or require the payment of more surcharges if a person's under the age of 25. A bank can require U.S. citizens to provide a social security number to open a credit card account, but they must allow people from other countries to provide a different form of identification. And a sports bar was found to be able to refuse entry to anyone wearing colors or a motorcycle club membership in order to reduce potential fights between rival motorcycle gangs. Can businesses exclude certain customers? It depends. A business can exclude specific people as long as there's a legitimate and non-discriminatory reason that they're doing that. For example, the courts have found that banning someone who cashed bad checks or stole his money to that business didn't violate Unruh. A business could also ban someone who damages property, who's injured others, or disrupts the business, but the business cannot exclude people because they have a protected characteristic such as race or sexual orientation. All right, let's look at another example. Kara's Comics. Kara's Comics puts on an event to highlight the work of female identified comic book creators. The event includes a session discussing how female identified people can get involved with making comics. The event is open to all members of the public. Has Kara's Comics violated the Unruh Act? And the answer is no. So let's talk about it. So can businesses have events that target specific groups? The Kara's Comics example shows us that they can, but they must be open to all people from the public. So for example, these events, as long as they are open to everyone, would not violate the Unruh Act. A wine store hosting an event that highlights winemakers of color that are underrepresented in the industry, a company that hosts an event that focuses on educating women, on negotiating higher salaries. But what about events that are open only to a particular category of people? These types of events, the law is unclear on whether they would violate the Unruh Act. So CRD recommends that businesses make events open to all people in order to avoid violating the Unruh Act. What about when businesses provide promotions or discounts for certain groups of people? Again, the law is not completely clear. The courts say that the important question to ask here is whether this promotion or discount is furthering what they call a compelling social interest. But I will say that generally, the courts have found that these types of discounts or giveaways are not lawful because there really isn't a compelling social interest in discrimination. So here are some examples. A court held that gender-based discounts on drinks for women, or often called ladies' nights, violate the Unruh Act because the goal of bringing more women into an establishment doesn't really provide a big social benefit. But the courts have found that age-based pricing, like discounts for seniors or young adults, do serve a compelling interest because they encourage the attendance of families. So businesses have to provide services in other languages. So the Unruh Act does not require businesses provide services or documents in languages other than English unless it's required by another law. But CRD definitely encourages businesses to offer services and materials in different languages because it's important to include all people in California, including people who don't speak English, and we want them to feel welcome and available to receive services at any business in California. Okay, let's do another example. This is Sales Sports Superstore. Sorry for the name. Sales Sports Superstore is a local chain that sells sporting goods. They have restrooms that are labeled men, women, and all gender. Sales has a policy that people who identify as transgender or gender nonconforming must use the all gender restroom. Is Sales violating the Unruh Act? And the answer is maybe. And if you've been sitting through this presentation for a while, I think you're starting to see a theme that when it comes to the Unruh Act, there are many things that the law is not completely settled on, and this is one of them. So the courts haven't addressed whether Unruh applies to the use of gender segregated facilities, but in California, all single user restrooms in businesses and places of public accommodation must be labeled as all gender restrooms unless they're exempted by another law. But the use of an all gender single user restroom should always be a matter of choice. And where possible, businesses should provide an easily accessible single user restroom for use by any person who desires increased privacy, regardless of the underlying reason why. So what about businesses that only have gender segregated facilities? This is businesses like locker rooms or public pools with showers or restrooms that are only gender segregated. So the law prohibits businesses from discriminating against customers based on their gender identity or expression. And while the courts haven't specifically ruled on how this protection relates to the use of gender segregated facilities, CRD's view is that businesses should allow people to use restrooms, locker rooms, dressing rooms, dorms, etc., that correspond with someone's gender identity, regardless of their sex assigned at birth. Okay, so let's talk about some best practices to avoid violating Unruh if you're a business. I would say number one, education. So attending a presentation like this, reviewing outreach materials, attending other trainings. Also considering adopting an anti-discrimination policy with clear expectations for your employees, having something that you talk about regularly that's in writing that you talk to all new employees about will help employees understand that your business has specific expectations when it comes to discrimination. You can also post signs or other things to show that your business is open and welcome to all types of people. Also, we would say you should consider getting involved with one of CRD's programs called Welcome In. CRD has a program called Welcome In where we provide information, education, and skills to local businesses to help them to ensure that their businesses are safe and inclusive for all. We provide skills around bystander intervention and training and information on anti-discrimination laws. If you're interested for your business to work with Welcome In, please take a look at the link on this slide to see a list of requirements and more information about our program. So here's some information on what can happen if a business violates the Unruh Act. So that business could be liable for one, what are called actual damages. So if a business violates the Unruh Act, they could be liable for actual damages, which are the costs that occurred because the violation occurred. So this can be up to 3 times the amount of actual damages. So an example, if a bakery refuses to let someone pick up and purchase the wedding cake they ordered because they are a person of color, and as a result, the person has to pay $4,500 to rush an order at another bakery. Their actual damages are $4,500, and they would be entitled to up to 3 times that amount, which would be $13,500. Another type of damages that a business may be liable for paying for if they violate the Unruh Act are statutory damages. These are damages ordered by the court and required by the law for any violation of the Unruh Act. And the reason for these damages is to provide a deterrent for violating this law and compensation when sometimes there aren't really a lot of actual damages or individual damages. And these damages must be at least $4,000 per violation. So for example, a bar hosts a series of networking events that can only be attended by men. This is found to be a violation of the Unruh Act, and the bar could be liable to each complainant for at least $4,000 for each time they held the event. And another possible outcome, it's called injunctive relief under the law. This is ordering a business to do something or to stop doing something to prevent discrimination in the future. So for example, a business may be ordered to attend a training on the Unruh Act, such as this particular training. And another possible outcome are costs. A business found to be in violation of the Unruh Act could be required to pay the complainant's attorney's fees and the costs associated with filing a complaint or a lawsuit. So how do you file a complaint with CRD if you think that you've experienced discrimination or another violation of the Unruh Act? You can file a complaint with the Civil Rights Department, and when we take the complaint, we might be able to investigate, we might be able to offer mediation or a way to work it out with the business or the person that engaged in discrimination. We may even be able to go to court to enforce the violation of the law. A complaint involving an alleged violation of the Unruh Act has to be filed with CRD within 1 year of the alleged discriminatory act. So if you were denied access to a restaurant because you had a service animal and you want to file a complaint, you have to do that within 1 year of being denied access to that business. To file a complaint with CRD, you can visit our website, which is probably the easiest and is we encourage the best way to file a complaint with us. And a link is on this slide, but you can also call one of our phone numbers, and we have them both listed here on this slide. And finally, here are some resources that we have available on our website regarding the Unruh Civil Rights Act and other laws enforced by CRD. You can click on the link or you can use the QR code in the top right to get to those resources. I also wanted to add that CRD is now doing webinars 3 times a month. We are doing both employment and housing discrimination every other month, just a 101 or a general training. We're also doing trainings regarding the rights of workers and housing applicants and tenants with disabilities. And we're doing a regular special topics webinar where we're doing different topics that may be of interest to folks, including presentations on the Unruh Civil Rights Act. And in order to register for those trainings, you can click on the link on this slide. We are at the end of our training, and I just want to thank you for attending and for bringing your attention to the information that I gave to you today. And here is information on how to file a complaint again with CRD and our website and where all of our resources are. And I hope to see you again in another CRD webinar. Thank you.